hug.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Anyway, that's all.
Well, welcome. Let's get started. Now, welcome friends on Zoom and Jenny, Lauren, Michael, and
Hi.
Cindy. So we are here at CBE with Heather Aberg, and Heather is helping us with the continuation of our series of adult education study on taboo topics. Talking about stuff that is uncomfortable to talk about, or is sort of having difficult conversations. So what we're talking about today is mental health, and particularly mental health for adolescents. This is a topic that touches, I'm sure, all of us personally, sometimes very directly, sometimes more indirectly. As many of you know, we've had a congregant who lost a teenager to suicide just in the last 3 months. Very real and valuable conversation, and I can't think of anyone we'd rather have to offer this. So Heather, she'll explain a little bit, the founder of Resilience 1220, an organization, not-for-profit organization here in Evergreen, that was created really to provide mental health services to youth between the ages of 12 and 20 at no cost to them,
Right,
to reduce the barrier. So welcome.
Thank you. It makes me feel better, Jamie, because when I have stuff, sometimes it's my parents that come and they feel happy. But I love it because you're lifelong learners and they are too, and they're curious. They want to know what we're doing and support us, but they're also curious. I mean, how cool is that? Taboo topics, and here's your parents. So thank you all for being here. And I'll just quickly introduce myself, but then I want to know who is here, who you are, and kind of what you're hoping to get out of this evening's talk. And I also want you guys to chime in, like you're a child psychologist and you're working with congregants and kids, and you're a kid person. So everybody just chime in. But like Jamie said, I co-founded Resilience 1220. Honestly, there was the suicide in town in about 2017 or 18 of a young man who took his life off the bridge in Bergen Park.
Oh.
And I just, my kids are about the same age, and I grew up in this town, and I was working at Mount Evans home care and hospice, and I just love kids, and I love teens especially. And I've always had a passion for them, and I didn't know this child, and I did counsel a lot of his friends, and I tend to sort of, I don't know if you'd say specialize, but specialize in suicide and suicide survival, grief, trauma, and such. And when this kiddo died, I parked below that bridge and just wept. I mean, it's unimaginable. Or at that time, it was unimaginable. It's still unimaginable that a kid of 17 would be so hopeless. So that really kicked off Resilience 1220, and where we offer free mental health, and we try to mental health services and build resilience, and what my little brain tagline is, to prevent suicide ultimately, along with addiction, poor relationships, divorce, self-harm, and all these other things. But it really started when this young man took his life, and then there were 2 subsequent suicides, and I just was ready when Todd and I sat together. It was like, we're doing this and we can't not do anything in this great community where we have support and we're affluent and all these great things. No, these kids are really struggling. So we offer 10 free counseling sessions to adolescents ages 12 to 20, which is why we are at Resilience 1220. And also lots of groups. I brought flyers for a couple of our groups, LGBTQ teen book club, and we've got a group that I help lead every month. This is a bizarre one. Speaking of computers, this is a augmented reality group that kids can come to on Zoom. After COVID, we have a lot of anxious teens who won't leave their homes. So they go on this group and they choose an avatar. And they learn social emotional skills and coping skills while dressed as a green bean, an owl, a prince, like a jester. It's bizarre, but I went through the training and it's so cool. But how weird. So, but kids are coming. I think partly they're curious, but partly it's their language. And there are a couple kids who are so socially anxious, they literally can't leave the house. So what an opportunity. We're always trying to adapt to their needs. I started this group, Support After Suicide Loss. I started it as a grief counselor at the hospice. And I brought it, and then I took it under my license when I left there. And now I've brought it under resilience. And we are seeing some younger kids coming to group. It's a lot of adults, but it's how do we hold each other up and stay resilient after the loss of a loved one? And suicide's just so incredibly painful and confusing. There's other groups, they're online, but these are the ones I had in my car. Oh, here's a talk I just want to promote. It's understanding and managing anxiety. And this is a talk on Zoom for free. It's all free on February 1st from 7 to 8:30. And one of our therapists, Kelly Andrews, she specializes in anxiety and anxiety disorders. And she's a great speaker. It'll be the third time I've heard this talk because it's so good with really practical ways to help someone who struggles with anxiety. Or if you yourself suffer from anxiety, it's just a great talk. I also brought, I don't know, you probably have this, a group of grief resources that we put together at the hospice, and I brought it, and it's for kids and adults, but resources for any age going through death loss, and then some specific ones, like there's now a group for people who've lost a loved one by overdose or suicide, things like that. So there's this extensive list. Any questions? Oh, I want to mention too that Elizabeth from here helped organize and bring about this library at our office. Our office is the Miller House right next to Buchanan Rec Center. Come by, check out our library resources. It's mental health, it's fiction, it's nonfiction, it's LGBTQ, grief, and so on. It's kind of my personal library that ended up there. So come on by.
Do you want us to add to it?
Sure, if you've got current-ish books, we'll take them.
I'll see what I've got.
Okay, but
And
thanks
you can decide if
to
you want
Elizabeth.
anything.
Yeah,
You want
Elizabeth
me
did that as part of her mitzvah project as an adult.
I thought it was going to be here because I
Oh.
know I bought a book off of her
Wish list.
Mhm. Yeah.
It can travel here. It's not that big. If you guys ever wanted to have it here for some time, you bet. And then Cappy, when she closed Hearthfire, just bombarded me with
Oh,
lots of
nice.
those books.
Nice.
Any questions about Resilience 1220? We are a nonprofit and just appreciate all the support that you all give us. But let me know if you have questions. There will be bookmarks here. Who are you all? I kind of know this room, but who's here and what would you like for me to be sure to talk about this evening?
Let's see, Lauren, do you want to chime in and introduce and share your interest in this conversation?
Yes, I'm just here to listen. I lost a brother to suicide, and just today, one of my Israeli friends is on her way back to Israel. It was her daughter transgendered, and he's gone now. And so it's a tough world, and so I'm just here to listen. Hopefully I can help somebody along the way.
I'm glad that you're here. And just know our suicide loss support group is a hybrid group, and people are calling in from kind of all over. So everybody's welcome. Our age is currently 14 and up, but we have a 12-year-old who wants to come. So I think we might bend that age.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's so sad.
It is.
Thanks, Lauren. Michael, Sandy,
Yep, we're here. We're kind of having dinner.
Go ahead.
But we've got a granddaughter, so of course we're interested in, any information that you have that would be helpful over the long run. And I'm a psychologist, but today was my first day of retirement, so I'm no
Oh,
longer dealing with it with my patients.
wow, that's a big deal and a big change.
Yep, it is.
How
It
old is
is.
your daughter?
So my granddaughter is 3 years old, our granddaughter. Sandy is here too.
Mhm.
Oh, I want one.
Yeah, she's a cutie. The rabbi got to meet her last night.
The darling.
Oh, my goodness. Well, congrats on retirement.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So we're here mainly to listen.
Thanks for being.
Thanks.
Sure.
Thanks.
And I've also experienced, my sister died by suicide many, many years ago, probably about 40 years
Yeah.
ago. So,
It's such a healing process and
yeah,
really, you never fully heal, and
right.
it's important, right? It's sort of a way to honor them is to still miss them and wonder.
Yeah.
I'm glad y'all are here.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this.
I'm glad you're here. I just learned things about
I know.
congregants I know. That I didn't know. Thank you, Jenny. Did you wanna, Jenny's tuning in from Toronto.
Ooh,
Um,
best candy bars in the world. I don't know why.
there
Cadbury.
she is. Jenny, did you want to say what your interests are for tonight?
I'm from Toronto. I'm here just want to listen, but my partners has a friend. Two of them, they commit suicide.
Oh, and is there any specific question that you may have, Jenny, or are you all just sort of tuning in? As I sort of ramble around, or is there something did anyone have anything specific they want to hear about or make sure I talk about?
This time of year,
Oh,
when I was practicing in New York, it's not too different, I don't think. January and February were consistently the toughest years relative to suicide, highest rates.
Yeah.
Is that true around here? You're aware of that?
well, it's interesting you said, so when I worked at the hospice, we still worked with paper.
Uh-huh.
And I was a bereavement counselor, so by month I would have, deaths by month. That sounds so morbid, doesn't it? But January was always my thickest month, the most deaths, and December was second. And suicides we know often happen in the spring, but for whatever reason, end of the year, after holidays, whatever, it's a lot of passings of all kinds of, ways of dying in January, and then lots in December. But, I just presented about seasonal affective disorder, right? Which is a really big issue in these climates. And I feel it. I don't know if any of you do, but I have a lethargy and I just want to kind of hole up at my house a lot. And so it's more effort to go out and do things. And so to know that about ourselves, if we struggle that way, to be sure that self-care is happening and such.
This stretch of cold weather
Yeah.
was reminiscent of Rochester, which is gray from November to April. And the seasonal affective disorder without the sunshine is just exaggerated.
Right?
Just exaggerated. So
You bet. You
certainly
bet.
contributes.
Versus when we go out and just walk the dog and see the leaves, it's a really stark contrast, isn't it? Mhm.
Yeah.
And we, of course, our mood shifts.
Yeah.
We're gonna say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, in addition to that, my husband died in March. And I didn't know for a number of years why I was getting very kind of low energy and not feeling myself as March came up. So in addition, I'm just thinking everybody may have those times apart from,
Their anniversary time.
yeah, and you may not even know what was happening. I didn't realize or make that connection for a long time. But it was, once I realized it was very real. So I'm just thinking in addition to, what months are hard months, in general, we all may just have things that we're not, I mean, it was the sort of like almost a visceral reminder. And it was connected with the weather and the time of year. And it was just a very visceral reminder.
Related to that, yet not. I was listening to a podcast, so interesting. 10% Happier is my new favorite. And it was talking about even the time of day as being a trigger. So for people who suffer from anxiety, often later in the day when they're as a child, their parents would come home and the arguing would start or the badgering or whatever. That time of the day can be a trigger for some people. And, I think like you said, Susan, we're not even aware sometimes until we look at our patterns. That's where I think therapy helps me, because I can, I can hear myself say, oh, this time last year I had a really similar feeling, or the last time we had a cold snap, I also this, that, and the other, and sort of to try to preemptively plan for the next cold snap, what I'm going to do when I look on my phone and see we're headed into X number of days. I need to be sure I schedule this, that, and I follow through. And so that's where I think we can help each other, but, as psychologists and helping folk like, with our clients to really be mindful of that. I was going to mention as well, because a lot of you have had losses by suicide, and the terminology now is died by suicide. And that shifted a while ago because the words committed suicide imply that it's a criminal act. And so the new verbiage is died by suicide or died by their own hand. And I can kind of feel how down the road and culturally committed is sort of a naughty, bad. And now we're understanding so much more about suicide. But when we talk about suicide and trauma, and I think a loss by suicide is trauma. There's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score. It's an old tried and true. It's an excellent book about how trauma, like you said, is trapped in our body, whether we're aware or unaware. And it's written by Besser van der Kolk, and it's everywhere. It's really good. There's a workbook as well, if people are really wanting to learn more about how trauma is it's kept in our cells and our souls. Great book. Hard to read, but great to read. So I always say just bite-sized pieces. Well, I think what I might do is ramble for a second. This is the first time that I've done that. My eyes are going, so allow me to put my glasses on now. It's the first time. You're here for it. You're my witness that I need. Oh, there it is. Bring it. So I guess I'm gonna tell you things you already know, but I want to just sort of lay the groundwork for what these kids are up against. And having a 3-year-old granddaughter is so delightful. On the other hand, it's terrifying. I think it's really scary. Our kids are about the same age. Mine are a little younger, but if they're going to have kids, it's a little scary, I think, being a child these days. So I did ask Brandon Brecky last year from Evergreen High School. He was the principal. I said, what are you seeing here after COVID? Define kind of what you're feeling from these kids. And he said, existential crisis. And I think from my kids, that's what I hear too. They blame me for global warming, poverty, the increase in all of the prices of everything, property, gas, and so on. Our healthcare is struggling, politics and such. I'm kidding. My kids, we talk a lot about it, and they do blame us. But I do think they're inundated with social media and news. And as our teachers are teaching, they're not helping kids guard against what is really, kids are at a saturation point where they don't know what to do with all of this horrible and bad news. I think social media and screens more and more are harming our kids. Someone said, remember your childhood, and you may have had drills at school for fire or tornado. And now every school from elementary up, and maybe even lower, but including college, are doing active shooter drills. But they don't talk about, what does that mean? We're going to go through the drill, but these kids wake up wondering, they just don't feel safe in the world. And I don't know about you guys, but I felt plenty safe in the world. It wasn't even a question. And so it's just a different feeling from the get-go, stranger danger, and so on. And we know statistically that's not gone up. It's gotten better, in fact, that we don't have kidnappings like we used to, but these kids are so afraid. And you guys jump in with any comments. Did you have any? Okay. And then I think I was just talking this morning to some friends about how community, I love Beth Evergreen. We have community and all ages and all backgrounds, and such a diverse group where think about when you were a child. I had my Girl Scout people and my church people, and I had my teachers, and then my friends' parents, and then just the different tiers of support that I felt as a young person in this community from different areas. And I do feel like now a coach isn't allowed to have an intimate rapport with an athlete. They're so scared. A teacher can't hug a kid anymore. You have to do a side hug. There's no time to get to know your kids' friends. So we don't have this integration of different generations and walks of life. And we also have this very black and white society right now. But I think that multi-generational support and relationship is missing. The other thing is, I had a kiddo sit in my office and say, I am not really good at anything. I am average at a lot of things. And I thought, that's fantastic. But this kid really said, I'm not good at anything. And there's a message. I think YouTube was a big part of it, where we see these 3-year-olds who can rock the violin and 2-year-olds that do backflips, and I mean the talent, right? And we have stars that are rising, and we have all these shows about who can be the best baker or dancer or this and that. And I think that we already as a culture have a competitiveness, but that's just added to it. And people feel like they have to be really good, or they should just not do it. I feel that way. I mean, I would like to take that course, the class, what did I just say it was called? Improv. The improv class that the theater's doing, but I don't know if I'll be good enough. Isn't that silly? So I think these kids get the message that they have to be elite at there's no more club fun stuff. And then COVID just really exacerbated this, right? They're on their social media even more. The rise in pornography in girls as well is way up. There are treatment centers now in our country for pornography addiction in kids and teens. Drug use went up, abuse went up. If anyone's studied the adverse childhood experiences, have you guys? It's a great study. The acronym is ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And what they determined, back in the 90s, and they being Kaiser, sent out the first study, and there have been subsequent studies about factors in a child's life that will affect their mental health and actually their physical health, particularly their heart. And they started with like 10 things, and many of them you can guess these factors, and you needed a score of 4 or more to be at risk. And the factors are death of a parent, divorce, substance abuse, incarceration, physical abuse, and such. And then, I mean, ultimately what it said to our country is, oh, early childhood development is actually important. It can save us dollars over here. And so that kicked off a lot of programs. But in COVID, there was a statistic from the CDC that said 73% of teens experienced at least one of the adverse childhood experiences, which is a lot. So if you were starting at 3, it may have kicked you up to 4 or 5. Does that make sense? Am I saying that right? It's really interesting information. And I mean, any of the statistics from the CDC around teens and COVID and our suicide rates, self-harm, addiction, and so on, are just really sad. And we still have a lot of fallout from COVID. Teachers are burnt out, for sure. Kids are socially stunted and getting there. But I was hearing a lot after COVID, Evergreen Middle School sent out an email. I don't know if any of you saw it, from Tim Villalpando, who doesn't often, I've never heard him in my experience, have a call out for help, but he was saying, parents, families, help me with the kids. They've lost, he said it much better than this. They've kind of lost their inhibitions. We're seeing racism, sexism, inappropriate touch, bullying through the roof. And, can you help me at home to have some of these conversations? So I think that we're getting a better grip on that, but we were hearing a lot in Resilience 1220 about boundaries, even within the family. Boundaries, because it was all so, we were all sort of stunted for a while.
What do you mean that we were stunted? Because we weren't having interactions?
Yeah. So think about,
Mhm.
go back to 7th grade. Right. But just like prepping for school in the morning, getting your hair right and wondering what the plans were for the weekend, and sitting in classes and being quiet and taking turns and behaving that way. And then if you didn't have that for 2 years, these kids kind of went back and they regressed, or they just sort of forgot their manners, right? Because they're still learning.
Yeah.
So we struggled, but I hope we remembered our manners. But I know it felt so weird.
Yeah.
Imagine how they felt after 2 years. Does that answer that?
Yes, thank you.
You bet.
It's interesting that, socialization, right? Learning and becoming isn't like a one-time thing. Right? You can learn it when you're in preschool and maybe elementary school, and then you have COVID and you're in middle school, and you realize, you can regress in your socialization skills if they're not exercised.
My new favorite analogy is like a muscle, right? A muscle that you have to keep toning. You have to keep using a muscle in order to keep it strong, whether it's socializing, if you're struggling with depression and anxiety, building that muscle by going out of your house, by having a conversation, right? It's also known as exposure therapy, but to me, it's like, okay, like, let's keep working that. When I think of suicidal folks, and when I've sat with them, it's like their muscle has atrophied. And with that comes all this horrible self-talk. They can't get it together, right? By whatever terms they're measuring themselves by. But their muscles atrophied, and they've tried, and they've just tired out, literally tired out. You guys can disagree with that description, but it's just one way of thinking of the things that we do. Even traveling, you were saying that about travel, like travel, if you haven't done it in a while, like, okay, we're going through TSA, what do I pack? And then what we're going to do is, and it's just kind of the newness of it. It's because we haven't exercised that muscle. I don't know about you guys, but I became more of an introvert after COVID. And it's also this time of year, but I exercised the muscle of being alone, and I rather liked it. So it can also work that way. I want to just touch on the pros about COVID, because who would think that there'd be any silver lining? But to me, the beauty of it is that we can talk about mental health now. We can say, how are you? And it's funny because there's a woman who said the new F word is fine. How are you? Fine. And that's the new F word, because, hey, now we can say, you know, I'm kind of struggling, or it's been a dark winter. That cold snap was really hard on me. You know, you need not say anything more, unless they invite you to, or whoever your audience is. But I think it's okay now to not be okay. So that's pretty cool. Woo!
But the line about fine is an acronym.
What is it for?
Fucked up, insecure, needy, and emotionally.
Great, Jamie. Thanks. Fucked up, insecure, needy, and
Emotionally.
okay, well, so there's another. Okay, so we shouldn't take fine away, should we? We can't do away with it completely. But in the context of lying, you got to be more honest. Oh my gosh, that's really funny. I forgot about that one. Thank you for reminding me of that. A couple more pros is that we came back with a lot of gratitude, didn't we? Gratitude for the simplest things, like a hug. I think it caused pause in some people in a good way, about what they, you know, people who quit their jobs, people who changed their way of doing things. So it just sort of like hit that pause button for a really long time, to create new habits or do away with not so great habits. People explored a lot of hobbies, and I think there's a large component for mental health to find something that distracts you, that's creative, or you know, something different. You know, your bridge club, like a hobby, and a lot of people didn't have hobbies, rather they went to the screens. I want to just give you a couple quotes from, I used to have a youth advisory committee, and I said, I want you to describe adolescence. And one analogy I really appreciated was this young man who said, my adolescence feels like I'm on a racetrack and I'm zipping around in this loop. And let's say I get sick, or there's some interruption, a family emergency or whatever, and I have to pull my car off the track. I am the car. I have to get off the track and take a pit stop. Why, when I come back online and I have to get back into life, I gotta get ripping right away. There's no adjustment, readjustment period. I just have to get on the track and keep racing. And I think a lot of us feel like that as adults too, but you know, this kid was 15. Someone said it's a pure power drain. One adolescent said it's so scheduled, and the other said it's just too much pressure. So that's kind of how I wanted, I don't think I told you guys anything you don't know, but is there anything you want to add or comment on? You don't have to agree with anything I said. But I mean, does that paint a picture of adolescence? Scary, huh?
I think one other impact of the downside of the COVID and other kinds of things like that is that it cut down access to for teenagers to other adults beyond their family.
Mhm.
Who were neutral, at least, if not very supportive, you know, could be seen as adolescents as supportive. And the coach and the teacher, favorite teacher, and the, you know, the other, you know, scout leader or whatever it might be. It reduced their access to other friendly adults.
I mean, just think of, I don't know how long you guys were closed here. 3 months, but that you don't get to walk in here and just get the hellos or the great game or the just the touch on the shoulder, little, you know, little gestures that made such a difference.
Lauren, did you have a comment?
Yeah, this is really Jewish, because I think the biggest thing is physical contact. Even in your home, you know, somebody has to be isolated and they're put away and you couldn't hug them or kiss them, and everybody had masks on, and, you know, people couldn't see their children and their grandchildren. So the physical contact, because I think that's a real Jewish element to our group. We're used to hugging everybody,
You bet.
you know, and the same thing when we go to synagogue, you'd walk in and everybody'd be masked, but you couldn't touch anybody, you know, don't touch anybody. So I think it's that's really difficult. And I think for children, even more so, or young people. I mean, for all of us, older people, young people, it doesn't matter. I think it's just an important element.
I think I totally agree. A lot of people who live alone complained and said, I couldn't even, hug my, whomever. And living alone, I think that there was a real longing for touch.
Right.
About kids and teenagers, even teenagers, safe touch is so important. And just a hand on the shoulder is,
Right.
or a handshake is touch.
Yeah.
Totally agree. Related yet not is the ability to move too. A lot of these kids who were athletes that we were seeing counseling said, I'm going nuts. Like I'm used to playing basketball. And if you think about that, there's a lot of touch in basketball. There's a lot of touch in sports. You team up with a partner and there's touch involved in your training or in the football game, you're touching.
Right.
And they really said it's hard to not be with my team and be part of something and working toward a goal. And they never said the touch part because they wouldn't, but you think about that need for touch. And I was talking with one of my kids the other night about wrestling, and she said, what is this wrestling? That doesn't make a lick of sense. And I said, it is a sport. It's hard. And she said, yeah, I have to wonder how many men just long for touch. So they went to wrestle because they're not getting touched. They're not getting held. They're not getting embraced. It's also a way to exert yourself in a very appropriate way. We were just wondering, I wonder if that draws certain young people who just need to be touched, like fiercely, because I think touch is so important. So good point. And did you have something?
I was just thinking, listening to what you were saying, that it is a really strong reminder to us, the adults that might come into contact with kids. I was just remembering that there was a teacher in our former religious school, because my daughter did not grow up here. And my daughter would just go and visit this teacher, but she wasn't my daughter's teacher, but she was so receptive to having her come after class and spend time. It was lovely. And it just is making me think how important it is for us to be really aware and remember the kids' names, call them by their names, let them know that we know that they are there, in whatever capacity that we know them.
I love that. Look them in the eye, give them a high five.
Just something.
Acknowledgement.
Somebody once told me that the best sound that somebody knows is their own name. But I was just thinking that for kids to be recognized and know that there's somebody that knows who they are.
Yeah. Sees them, right?
Mhm.
Because we all want to be seen.
Mhm.
And by someone who isn't obligated to see it.
Right.
Parents,
Aid to
to your point about
Right.
access to other adults.
Yeah, that's what
in your life.
made me think about that.
Parents.
Mhm.
young folk,
Yeah, no,
And-
you're
and I
right.
think, piece you mentioned earlier about sort of, you grew up and there was the church community and the Girl Scouts and there was the censored community.
Mhm.
And that's probably deteriorated and all the more so with COVID.
Yeah.
Where those structures are we're realizing how valuable and important they were to not just collective, functioning, but civic health, but also psychic and personal health.
I think that chitty chat on the sidelines or parents in carpool line, they missed out too, because when you think of when you raised your little ones, it was very lonely. I felt very isolated in what I was doing, and you're home a lot. And so, yeah, carpool line was where you'd or at the park, you're talking to people and you're exchanging ideas and you're laughing, and there was a lot missed out for the caregivers too. Exactly, grandparents that couldn't see their grandkids. Oh, just really tough. So we missed out on a lot, and I think nobody wants to look back and reminisce, but we still are feeling the effects.
How about the concept of for a child to be told that they can't see their grandparent, can't go visit them,
Right?
because you might kill them.
Oh, my gosh.
Oh, how's that interesting idea for a child to say, I could,
To wrap their brain around, I could kill him if I see him. And then how do you just sort of reintroduce them back into the world? Like, no, now it's safe. And like
Right.
it adds to that fear I was talking about with shooters and stuff. And now we can kill people by breathing,
that's right.
lots of anxiety. And there are a lot of kids who are still feeling that way. My kid's still wearing a mask, just so aware of not wanting to harm others. I want to switch gears to, and a lot of you are grandparents, and so maybe this isn't as helpful, but when people say, well, how do I, parenting tips is sort of what Elizabeth asked that I talk about. And do you guys know Sally Wandling? She was at the hospital. She started Camp Comfort. So we worked at the hospice and together and put together this years ago. We were doing a talk, and the 3 social workers who had kids all kind of, it's like this, but we wrote down a list of parenting tips. But Sally's, I'll never forget, she said, as a parent, when you pull into the driveway and you hit the clicker on the garage door opener, what are the kids thinking? And she said, that's a good gauge. Are they going, oh no, or hide, or, oh great, mom and dad are home, or whatever. She said to me that was a good gauge, and she has great kids, and she was always really good friends with her kids. So here's a list, if I can scan it and send it to you guys. But like we were talking about, I think touch. We'll just start there because we'd already talked about touch, but my kids are teenagers, and especially when periods started and stuff, I'd have to ask permission. Or now I have found that it's late in the day, they'll come into my room and I can rub their back. Or if we're on the sofa, like I've kind of found my cues, and my girls are the ones who don't like to be touched. My son, you could touch all day and he'd love it. So honoring which kids like to be touched, grandkids or kids. And nowadays too, asking consent is a big one. So asking consent for a hug from your grandkids is always makes you really cool. Using their pronouns correctly. So if you have a kiddo who's trying out different pronouns or a different name, to honor that. You don't have to understand it, but that is a perfect way to support someone by not, there's a couple kids in my LGBTQ group who are still being called their quote dead name, even though they've changed genders and have for years, they're still being addressed by their birth, their biological gender, and it tears them up. It just tears them up. So that is the number one thing you can do, is ask a kiddo their pronouns and honor their pronouns. Do you guys have questions about that? That's a whole hard. It's really hard. And there's going to be slip ups, and there's tons of confusion. And we have a great book in the library, a couple that Elizabeth got us on, just like, how do you use pronouns and practicing out loud? And the best hack is to just say their name. Hi, Sam, how are you doing today? Or when you're talking about Sam, just talk about Sam and just use their name, not their pronouns. Easiest way to do it. But if you're writing a name tag, write Susan, she, her, and you'll be so cool. So pronouns, pronouns are huge. And to kids who are on the who are not falling into that binary, that's just huge. Yep, consent, asking permission to touch. And in counseling, when I see families and parents, the number one thing is, and you guys know as psychologists, to shut up and listen. Listen, right? And that active listening and then not responding, where your tongue gets all bloody because you want to say something so badly and you want to offer advice, but listening, validating, and then saying, do you want advice, or did you just, do you want to vent, or do you want help? And asking again permission, and asking what they need. How can I help? Or do you want help? And this goes a long way. I think what happens, talking about building a muscle, if a muscle in the family is so exercised that a kid says something and a parent becomes reactive, and then the kid becomes reactive, and then we just have a big useless shouting match, that becomes a habit. And it's hard to break habits. And so that's where in the therapy space, we can practice that, right? So what is the proper way to respond to that? And if there's yelling, to be the adult and walk away and say, we're taking a time out here. Nobody hears yelling. But I think we're getting better. And grandparents, it's different. Grandparents, it's much easier, isn't it? To listen without as much of an agenda. Of course, you wish well for your grandkids.
So cute.
Right? But it's the parents' problem, right? To raise them. And I don't know, it's just different, I think, as grandparents. And you guys can speak to that, some of you. But for those of us, Risa, you have kids about my age too. So it's a lot, especially when they've left the house and they're figuring out their 20s and 30s, to just say, the other one is cheerleader. The other suggestion I have is just cheer them on. I know you'll figure that out. You're smart, you're gonna figure that out. You've got all this experience. I trust, it's what my parents did for me as I just flailed about in my 20s. They just said, you got this, you'll figure it out. Or you're figuring it out. You've already figured so much out. You're doing great. And it's sometimes so hard. Right? It's just, it's one of the, and this is like basic parenting. If you have a kid who's struggling with other things, that are atypical, that's maybe there's room for a lot of other things here, but I'm just speaking in general terms. Anything you guys want to comment on or add or disagree with? Yeah, say it.
I'm sorry.
Do it. Say it.
But I was thinking that when I was raising my daughter, who's now right on the cusp of being 30, and I guess when I was being raised, it was very common. I'm just thinking about the little grandchildren. It was very common to say hi, to whomever, and give them the instruction, or go give grandpa a hug or something, and thinking that we were socializing our kids to learn how to do this. And now I'm thinking how much better it would have been to ask them, or not pull them from behind you. And you might want to address, because we thought that we were teaching them something, but we weren't teaching them that we respected how they were feeling in that moment. And we were missing that. We weren't saying, even if it came to grandpa might like a hug, if you feel like you want to.
Giving some options.
And we didn't do that.
And I wasn't raised that way too. It was really honor the adults and do what you're told. And I can see how generations and certain people are really pushing back about kids are given too many choices now, and we did it this way and it's worked out well. But also I think Cade's pretty atypical too. And like some kids, you could say, for me, I was very compliant. Okay, I'll go hug. And for some kids, one of my kids, that's the worst thing you could do to them is
Give them the instruction.
Because they didn't feel safe anyhow, and then forcing them, it just really triggered, and from what I know, that there's just certain kids who can roll with things and certain kids who can't. So I think it depends on.
But I think it also goes to the issue that you were saying, that consent is sort of like the word of now, and to push a kid to do something, rather than asking, if you want to, this would be nice.
Yeah.
Or if you're comfortable, whatever, somehow respecting them in a way that we didn't.
Yeah.
I think there's also something though to the modeling, because I don't think kids get the modeling of how to be socially appropriate. So, you know, if somebody said, go say hello, that's different than what a lot of kids don't know how to do that.
Right. They
They
literally
just are
don't.
clueless about what do I say? How do I go about this? They don't get the modeling from, they certainly don't get it from the TV shows. You know?
No, and that's what they're
And-
really
and
dialed
that's-
into.
yeah.
That's probably their biggest influence these days. Now I think about the generations and how parenting wasn't really even a thing until parenting books came out in like the 60s, 70s. It's not even been that long. They were sort of accessories. And then these books, and then it was the love and logic craze. And now there's even this hand in hand parenting where you and your kid decide everything together. And you're friends with your kid and there's no, that scares me to death. But that you're really collaborating with your kid on their childhood. So we've gone to some really extreme stuff over here. But I do think there's a lot to be said for love and logic. The two choices has come back in teenagehood has been really helpful to give them two choices, because I do think they get overwhelmed. It could even be the consent thing. Like, would you like to give grandpa a hug, or do you want to text him from the corner? I'm just kidding. Do you want to go shake his hand, or kind of give some but some choices? And I wrote down modeling too. I think modeling's a big one that our kids are missing. But when I talk to parents about how to model, and the grandparents too, modeling meeting adversity and how you dealt with it. Because what kids aren't seeing is the behind the scenes stuff. Man, today I got cut off. And what I really wanted to do was roll my window down, but rather I took a deep breath and I just figured they were having a bad day. So that right there is modeling. And kids, we were kids, they're listening, and they're sponges, and they're listening and listening and listening. And yeah, they're getting it all from TV. But as grandparents and parents, just to be able to say, man, I had a crummy day. I'm so tempted to grab the bowl of chocolate, but instead I'm going to go for a walk, but I won't regret it, but I'm going to choose to walk. And it's modeling, right? Dialoguing. I struggle too. Then I choose between my coping skills. And I think that's a gift that we can give our kids and grandkids, is to, I have great parents, but I think I was observing more. So if you're observing that your dad comes home and pops a beer every day after work, right? That teaches you something. So to be paying attention to what we're modeling.
So there's a wonderful program, a national program called Moving Traditions, that is doing family-based learning with families who are becoming bar mitzvah, so making the transition into young adulthood, 12 and 13 years old, students and their families. And one of the things that seemed particularly obvious, but not been formulated for me before, was that at that age, as you know, these preteens are becoming young adults, the locus of authority shifts from parents to their peers. So they care much more about what their peers think than what their parents think. And that requires a whole pivot for parents, a significant pivot, right? It can be threatening when you no longer, you've been stripped of your authority. Right?
They don't care anymore.
Yeah, they don't care anymore what you think. So then you get into these battles of the will, and, who's the boss? And I think it's, and what doing this program with parents and talking with them about what it's like to do that shift. That one of the things that seemed particularly helpful as advice that I received as a parent was, this is what you were alluding to, of modeling vulnerability.
Yeah.
right? That I struggle with that too. I get sad about that too. I struggled with that when I was a kid. Right, preteens and certainly young children, early childhood, we think as parents the way we can be most supportive is by saying, I got this, I know how to do it, you're going to be safe, all's going to be okay, and I'll take care of you. And there's no vulnerability in that. Exposing vulnerability is threatening to an early childhood, developmentally. So parents, we have to shift gears from being the confident, secure sense of security and safety that we're providing for the children to being the opposite, vulnerable and exposed and raw and accessible, in that way. And that's a shift from like parent as, safekeeper, safety, guardian to parent as peer. Because if you want to maintain your authority, you got to shift to peer.
So true.
So that seemed really clunky transition, for both. But it did seem very helpful to me, and the parents that I've talked about this with seem like an aha going off.
Like a duh, because you say it in words and it's like, oh, that's exactly it. Is if you're still going to try to dominate your 15-year-old or 16-year-old who has a license and tell them what to do, good luck, right? I love that. Got that written down anywhere? Want to send me
Yeah, I can find that.
in your spare time? I'll find it. It's here. It's not going anywhere. It makes me think of, there's a great author named, it's going to come to me, but Untangled is one of her books, and she writes about teenage girls, and I love her analogy. She says parents are the edge of the swimming pool, and at about 12, 13, the girls are splashing in the pool, and that's her what do you call it, like her focus.
Yeah, locus of authority.
Locus of authority, because all of a sudden that's like super important. But occasionally that teenage girl will swim over to the edge and hold on. It's safe, it's sturdy, it's strong, it's predictable, it's protective. And she'll come to you and you're like, oh, there you are. And then she'll turn around, put feet on you and shove off of it again to go to her friends. But like your job is to be that pool edge, right? And let her be over here until she needs to come back. And it's like, right. The other analogy I love about teens is when they're little kids, they're dogs, and they're cute puppies, and they do what you say. Well, they tend to do what you say. And then when they're adolescents, they turn into cats. They don't give a shit about anybody but themselves. They want to sleep all day. They're lazy, right? And then as young adults, they turn into dogs again, hopefully. Right. But they get some of those, loving, unconditional joy in that back. Well, I know we're short on time. Is that true? Are you guys, feel free to sign off if you.
Another 15 minutes.
Okay. I just want to bring up a couple other things that I thought of that I tend to talk to parents about. This is one thing my kids said. A parent's job is to build the trust so kids will open up. And so I have kids come in and they say, I don't trust my parents. Or they'll say something and say, are you going to tell my parents? There's just really there's not a trust there. And I think by listening, you can build that trust. One kiddo in that youth advisory committee said, don't just tell us to de-stress, teach us how to de-stress. Like, look, we really need the tools. A big part of being a parent, as you guys know, is forgiving your kids and apologizing. I learned yesterday that there's the 5 love languages, and then there's also the 5 ways that you receive apology. It's like a little quiz you can take online on how you receive apology the best. Thought that was interesting. Believing in them. Some of you know my dad. He used to just look, never touched as a kid, Chinese family, but he'd come up and touch me, which was big, on the back, and he'd say, you're just doing a great job. He'll still do it. Pat, 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 you're just a great person, and so to say to our loved ones, you're doing a great job, We're just, and it's true, they're doing it. And to remind ourselves, as parents and caregivers and humans, that we're doing a good job. And then we got to remind our kids they're doing a great job. Do you guys know Ross Green? His whole theory is that kids are trying their hardest. It's true. I think all humans are trying their hardest. And sometimes we doubt that. And we think, well, why don't they this and that? Because they don't, because they can't, because they, there's a great book called He's Not Lazy. And I pass that one out a lot. Like, this kid's really trying, but they're bringing their best game. But where as caregivers can we do a better job to support them? They're not trying to be defiant. The other one I think is fun is taking those personality tests. Like, you can take the love languages test, you can take the Enneagram or other personality tests, and then talking about it. Like, it's just food for thought, right? Always curious. The danger zones, so kind of the hot spots that I call parents out on, nothing you don't already know, but when parents see their kids as an extension of themselves, which all towns do this, but I do think in this successful town, parents say, well, I went to Harvard and we both have our this, that, and the other degree, so my kids are going to do the exact same thing. Good luck. Or my kid's really great at baseball, they're going to get a scholarship and they're going to go to blah, blah, blah. Good luck. You add that pressure. And so really letting kids that I've had kids say, I am not my parents. I'm not following that track. The more they push me to their track and their expectations, the more I'm pushing back. The danger zones are caring too much what other people think. Also the danger of social media. What was the thing over this last holiday season? Lots of families with the same pajamas, which is adorable. But some people were like the whole family, generations all wearing the same brand of pajamas and print and stuff. And other people who are struggling were like, I think it's dangerous to say boys will be boys or teens will be teens. I think that's really dangerous because it's allowing misbehavior that I think can be either it was more accepted back in the day and it's not now, or it's just a brush off. No, not all boys will be drunk every weekend. That's not okay. The one I hear a lot is my kids should be happy. They're physically capable. They have a great school. We have an intact marriage. What could they be unhappy about? How could they be depressed? Ouch. That's really harmful thinking for these kids. There's a great film called Race to Nowhere about a really uptown school in Palo Alto and suicides, which we're having. We've had our fourth now of a young adolescent who, on the outside has everything. And so what's the mismatch here? That's where I think Resilience 1220 is so busy because it was free and the kids ages 12 and up can get their own counseling. So kids were calling saying, my parents don't believe in counseling, but I can't imagine, I have to talk to someone and I have to navigate, I have to figure out how to live with myself and this family for the next 10 years, right? And so we don't have a lot of kids like that, but I think the fact that it was free and open to 12 and up brought in a lot of people who wouldn't normally come to counseling.
Heather,
Mhm.
do you need to get the parents okay?
Nope, which is why we chose 12, because our suicide is the leading cause of death in adolescents in Colorado, in this county, especially high. And so they passed a bill a few years back where in Colorado at the age of 12, you can get your own counseling without your parents' permission.
I didn't know that. Thank you.
That's why we chose 12. And we don't see a lot. I mean, Evergreen, you need a ride and stuff. So most parents of 12-year-olds know, but not all. But we do have a fair amount of 16 and up. Once they can drive, they'll say, yeah, I don't want my parents to know. But I want some counseling, which is pretty great. I always say to when you see your grandkids even or adolescents, please refrain from asking about school What are you studying? What school are you going to? What are your interests? And here's why. If they're getting the message from their parents, there's principals and teachers and the classmates about achievement in grades. Lots of my clients will say, I'm just a grade. My parents would love me more if I have A's, and if I have a C, they're really mad at me and they don't like me. And so I beg of you, it's so hard. It's really hard. Or I'll even preface it with, I know you get asked this a lot, but I'm asking out of true curiosity because I knew when you were little that you loved biology. So I'm wondering if you're doing something in science. But rather try to ask something else totally unrelated to school. It could be about learning or what their interests are, but try not to ask what their major is or what they're going to study in college or any of that academic stuff. And let's try to do our best to see them as humans, not just students. Does that make sense? It's a hard one.
Do people, parents or whatever, still reward their children for good grades?
Oh, yeah. And they posted on Facebook that Johnny got a 4.0 and a scholarship. And
Oh, they bumper stickers.
Oh.
My student is an honor roll.
I like the ones about cats and stuff. My cat's on the honor roll. But I think it's very competitive. It's again back to that. I have to be successful and great.
One of the things that felt remarkable when we moved here 18 years ago from the East Coast is the way I put it then was, and this was Buffalo, which is more Midwest than sort of East Coast, but that the first question that people ask you out East is, what do you do for a living?
Yes.
And the first question I got asked here was, what do you do to live? Right? People ask me, do you ski? What do you do for fun? What's your recreation?
I love that.
And I'm just realizing that we probably don't do that for our kids.
Exactly.
And maybe that was a sort of benefit of my profession sort of being obvious. Sleeves, that was the question and a way for people to try to interact with me my person rather than my role, right? My profession. But that seems like questions about what are you doing for fun in school?
What do you like to do outside of school?
Yeah.
What do you and your friends, what music do you guys like? Tell me about the artists. Do they still play music videos? Do you guys know, just anything, and it's hard, but come up with your standards, kind of your set ones, but just being curious. I think being curious is the winning way it's a way to win over anybody's heart, but especially a teen. To just ask questions and respond with, without judgment, external judgment, because within you're probably like, wow.
Something you can't search.
I saw a music video last night and I was like jaw on the floor, like, that's amazing. What artistry. Kids showing me. We're like, what's your favorite music? What's your favorite song and why? Like the song lyrics. Remember that where the lyrics meant a lot?
We could understand them.
Back in the day, but ask them what are they about, because I can't understand them either. So I think that's it. I have a list of resources and a way to find counseling, psychologytoday.com. Kids are getting COVID response. Kids are getting 6 free sessions through the I Matter Colorado program. So we're seeing resilience 10, and then we might do 6 through the I Matter, or vice versa. Suicidal kiddos get up to 12 sessions through the Second Wind Fund. And then just a heads up that the new crisis number, so 911 was what we'd call in a crisis, an emergency. If it's a mental health crisis, dial 988, right? And we're getting word out, but I think it's working. And it's nice that we have that differentiation now. Do you guys have any thoughts or questions? Did I cover what you wanted me to cover? I'm gonna throw out another great film called The Mask. The Mask They Wear. It's about boys. It's on Netflix, or it used to be, about boys and what they're taught about emotion and emoting. And it's a lot of incarcerated men being interviewed, but it's a very well done documentary about kids and boys, especially just not being taught how to deal with emotion. Taking care of yourself. Big one. We all know that.
You mean our taking care of ourselves
Taking care of
or
ourselves,
teaching our kids to take care of themselves?
both, right? So it's that modeling piece, but man, remember being in the thick of having an adolescent. And just remembering to exercise, to eat well, to get enough sleep so that we can be patient and show up for our kids in the best way. But you guys are all kind of past teenage point. And I didn't talk a lot about suicide, a whole lot, but just know that it's a huge passion of mine, and Lisa Shadeen in town as well, who runs the Littleton chapter, suicide loss support group. But if you need any resources for grief or trauma, or are looking for a group or a way to become active in prevention, let me know.
Let me just ask one question about that. I often hear from parents of the child who has lost their life due to suicide. Of the guilt around, how did I not see the signs? What could I have done differently? Yeah, when we all ask that question too, I think just this community members.
It's something that guilt is something that we bat around in our group all the time. And the truth is, guilt is a very uncomfortable feeling, but it's not a wrong or a bad feeling. It's very uncomfortable to have it. And a kind of like, true with any emotion, strong emotion, is to hold it out in front of you and talk with it. And I really believe in talking to the person who's died. And dialoguing with them about, your apology, the guilt that you have, writing letters and just talking out loud, prayer, meditation, and the guilt doesn't ever go away. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's in a sense the way that we love, that we wish we had done it differently. But I have to say, in our group, when we look at this, I think of two ways. So let's say there were no signs, you really missed, there weren't any signs. And that does happen where someone is, we call it the right to self-determination. In social work school, we learn like you have that right as a human to take your own life. And if there were no signs, there's nothing you could have done. There's a lot of woulda, coulda, shoulda, but it was their choice and they were determined to do that. And then we have this other group of people who there were signs. I guess I should go 3 categories. Maybe there were signs that in the rearview mirror, you're like, I didn't believe them. They said they were not doing well and I just didn't believe them because maybe they had, quote, cried wolf before, or I just couldn't fathom it. My own fear got in the way. And going through that forgiveness of the self, right? Which takes time. It's a journey, right? And you never fully forgive, right? Mm-hmm. And then the third being like, they struggled with mental illness. They had maybe had prior attempts. And this time they completed it, but I tried so hard. I showed up the way I knew how in their life. But it sounds so simple. It's not, it's so not simple. And I think that trauma work can really help. Some of the EMDR, which is the modality where it can really help bring down some of the sensations of guilt and the trauma trapped in our bodies. Dialoguing with other survivors reading about other people's stories and accounts of their guilt and how they've managed it. But a lot of it, and people want to smack me when I say it, but a lot of it's time. And that time is letting it whir around in your head, going down rabbit holes of what I woulda, coulda, shoulda done. But then coming back to self-compassion, really coming back to a place of we are trying our best. We all are trying our best. And if we turn back the clock and go left instead of right, 100%, 5,000% we go back. But we didn't know.
One other question. So, these taboo topics. Tools for opening up a conversation with an adolescent about mental health.
Good one, Janie. So I think it's so important. That's on my list that I didn't read, which is have those hard conversations. Have those really taboo conversations about everything. And I'll warn my kids, okay, mama's gonna say something weird now. You don't need to respond, but are you using a condom? Or remember that, and I'll fill in the blank. Mental health. So I did bring this booklet, which is a great conversation starter. And this is a booklet about mental health, and particularly for a caregiver who might be worried about a kiddo who's looking depressed and might be suicidal. And we know now, just ask the question, just simply, it's so hard, or line someone up like a therapist to ask the question. Are you feeling like you're going to take your life? Are you suicidal? Better yet, are you suicidal? And that opens a whole can of worms, whether it's yes or it's no. Even if it's no, have you felt suicidal? Do you know, they want so badly to talk about these things in a non-judgmental place. They're burning to talk about these things. It's amazing how our groups are so easy. It's getting the kids there, and then they just want to talk about mental health. It's all over social media. It's all over film, books. And so they want to have the conversation. It's starting it and giving the green light and saying, this is a safe space. And you're a mandated reporter, right? So being frank and saying, if I want you to know that you can speak in hypotheticals. I know that's kind of a weird one, but you can talk about a friend who might be feeling suicidal, and I'm here to listen. But I like to use their language. So think of the last person who killed themselves, the Ellen DeGeneres dancer guy. His name was, what was his name?
Oh,
Flashers, something like that. And how does that affect you? Boom, kind of an easy one. Or I heard this song by so-and-so. Do those lyrics mean anything to you? So kind of coming up with your openers. But I'll also just say, how are you doing? And I mean the truth. Don't give me the F word. I mean for real. And I want you to speak from your heart, not your brain. Your soul, not your brain. What are you doing to take care of yourself? What are your biggest stressors right now? Give me your top 3. Something like that. How do you handle those? Does that help?
Yeah, right. Thank you.
I mean, speaking their language, and those are direct yet safe questions.
In training therapists, the one myth I always run into, almost always, was that if you mention suicide, you'll give them the idea.
Right.
As
All
if it
of a
wasn't there
sudden.
already. So you dare not mention
Whoa,
that.
'cause they might
They
think
might act.
about it.
You might. And it's such a myth. Kids are already thinking about it.
One of the trainings that Rich Odsley did for us, and he's one of the town psychologists, he said, don't ask kids anymore if they think of suicide. Ask them how often they think of suicide.
Yeah.
But that's, how do you think of suicide?
And to not be afraid to say that out loud.
Right, to say the word suicide, or are you thinking of killing yourself? Or have you ever self-harmed? I wanted to let you guys know that Jefferson Center, which is the building just here, just know that they are free mental health. But they offer QPR, which is their 90-minute training on how to talk to teens about whether they're feeling suicidal. Great training. It's on Zoom. There's a training coming up March 8th, but I also happen to know there are some area trainings. Hold on, it's going to come to me. Just look for mental health first aid, which is longer, or QPR. And I didn't.
What's QPR?
It stands for question. So instead of CPR, it's QPR. Question, persuade, refer. So are you feeling like you want to take your life? Are you thinking of suicide? Let's say you say yes. Then it's persuade. Basically, it's not persuade. It's I'm camping out here till we get you some help. And then refer. So I'm going to get you some help. We're going to the crisis center, or we're calling 988. Or we're going to the office of the school office, like I'm not leaving you alone. And then it's refer. So much like 911, you don't have to bring, you just need to hold tight until the professionals come, is sort of the idea. Does that make sense? So you don't have to fix it. You just need to keep them safe until a mental health professional can help you. And we do have a 24-hour Jefferson Center crisis center. It's down on Wadsworth in Arvada, and you just go on in. If you're in crisis or you're with someone who's in crisis, and they do like a psych eval right then and there, it's all set up for mental health. And then they'll say, you know, you might just hang out here as long as you need, and they're really sweet. Or they might say, yeah, we'd like to admit you for a hold. But they're just, it's better than going to the ER. So that's good to know. The other thing that's good to know is if you're going to call a crisis hotline, you can be the one who's in crisis, but you can also be the caregiver of the person in crisis. What do I do? What are my next steps? Where do I go? So remember that that's for caregivers as well. Yeah. It's a lot of stuff. It's all on the resource page.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
On what resource page?
On Zoom.
On your research?
We got some nuggets there to support you. I mean,
Should have brought a pen.
having this conversation, I think talking about, I really appreciated, you know, folks talking about their own personal experience with, you know, with family members who lost their life to suicide, and I think the more we just are honest about that, you know, I have a child who struggles with mental health challenge, and you know, we can just take the taboo out of the topic.
Totally.
And, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. Hi, Risa.
Yes, hi, Lisa.
It's amazing. When you say someone you love died by suicide, there's always someone in the room who said, yeah, me too, unfortunately.
All right, friends.
Thank you.
We'll,
Stay warm.
Okay, you too.
Yep, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Retirement.
Yeah, happy retirement.
I highly recommend it, by the way.
That's a retired psychologist.
I've been retired psychologist for about 10 years now. It's really worth doing.
Good night.
Good night.